Greetings, fellow humans, and welcome to the Renaissance Yorkshireman podcast. Yesterday, I talked about one of Klaus Schwab's documents, which is on the website of the World Economic Forum. And while I was talking about it, I made the claim that economics is neither science nor art, but could in fact rightly be described as a pseudo-science. And two of the things that I mentioned to support that idea were homo economicus, or so-called rational economic man, and the Kuznets curve. And I'm not going to talk about the Kuznets curve in this video. I'll talk about it in my next video. But in this video, I want to talk about homo economicus, so-called rational economic man. First, as evidence to support my ideas, I'm going to quote from Ha-Joon Chang's very entertaining book, 23 Things That They Don't Teach You About Capitalism. And then I'm also going to draw on evidence from Kate Raworth's Doughnut Economics, 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist. And in my opinion, if you are a student at university studying economics and you don't own these two books, I really think you're wasting your time. So let's jump in to 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism. In this book, Ha-Joon Chang doesn't call his chapters, he calls them things. And at the beginning of each thing, he says what they tell you about capitalism and what they don't tell you. And then he supports his points with various evidence. In chapter 5, it's called Assume the Worst About People and You Get the Worst. What they tell you. The market beautifully harnesses the energy of selfish individuals, thinking only of themselves and at most their families, to produce social harmony. We have to assume the worst about people, that is, that they only think about themselves, if we are to construct a durable economic system. So this is the idea that capitalism puts forward and capitalist economists as some kind of universal truth. It simply is not. It's, first of all, it's not universal, and secondly, it's not true. He carries on, what they don't tell you. Self-interest is a most powerful trait in most human beings. True enough. However, it's not our only drive. It is very often not even our primary motivation. Indeed, if the world were full of the self-seeking individuals found in economics textbooks, it would grind to a halt because we would be spending most of our time cheating, trying to catch the cheaters, and punishing the court. The world works as it does only because people are not the totally self-seeking agents that free market economics believes them to be. We need to design an economic system that, while acknowledging that people are often selfish, exploits other human motives to the full and gets the best out of people. The likelihood is that if we assume the worst about people, we will get the worst out of them. So this brings me to 2 points. Firstly, this rational economic man, so-called rational economic man, could more accurately be described as rational economic sociopath or rational economic psychopath, because this model that the economists are using is essentially sociopathic and or psychopathic in nature. It's a person who primarily defaults to Machiavellian strategies and not reciprocal strategies. But here's the thing. People who are not psychopaths and not narcissists and not sociopaths and aren't suffering from some form of mental illness naturally default to reciprocal strategies and not to Machiavellian strategies. So by building this economic model, they've shifted things in favour of Machiavellian strategies, which in the long term has negative economic externalities on the planet, but it also impacts negatively on social capital and society at large. And this final point that Chang makes, if we assume the worst about people, we will get the worst out of them. Raworth develops this point in her book, and I'll come to that in a moment. The quotes I'm going to read you from Doughnut Economics all come from chapter 3, which is called Nurture Human Nature, from rational economic man to social adaptable humans. So on page 95, Raworth says this: Homo economicus may be the smallest unit of analysis in economic theory, equivalent to the atom in Newton's physics, but just like an atom, his composition has profound consequences. Yes, it does have profound consequences. She has absolutely hit the nail on the head with that one. She continues on page 95 and 96. The title of this section is The Story of Our Self-Portrait. She begins, rational economic man stands at the heart of mainstream economic theory, but the history of where he came from has been airbrushed from the textbooks. His portrait is painted in words and equations, not in pictures. If it were to be drawn, however, he would have to look something like this: standing alone, money in hand, calculator in head, and ego in heart. And this is the picture that she shows. So-called rational economic man. In one of my previous videos, it was either the last one I made or perhaps it was the one before that, I can't remember offhand, I said that language affects the way we think and it affects our culture. Well, so do pictures. People think in a mix of pictures and words. Some people are heavily wordy, some people are heavily picture. So, for example, a writer is probably going to be far more wordy than a painter, and a painter is going to be far more pictures. Myself, I'm kind of around 50-50. Sometimes I think in pictures, sometimes I think in words, sometimes I think in both. So it is absolutely of critical importance the pictures that we're using and the words which we're choosing, because this picture of rational economic man has affected the way that the study of economics has developed and the way that it allows for the exploitation of planet Earth, our planet, our home, and it's unleashed untold misery on the world and so much environmental destruction on the world. Raworth continues about this picture of so-called rational economic man on page 99. Milton Friedman reinforced Knight's justifications in the 1960s when he defended the cartoon character. He argued that since in real life people behaved as if they were making the self-interested, all-knowing calculations ascribed to rational economic man, then the simplified assumptions and the cartoon character that they depicted were legitimate. He was wrong. Milton Friedman was wrong. If you're an economist watching this and you're basing your models and your conclusions and the way you think on rational economic man, then it's all wrong and you are a bullshitter and a chancer. I'd like to read one final section from Kate Raworth's book. Beyond attracting self-interested people, however, studying Homo economicus can alter us too, reshaping who we think we are and how we should behave. Blah, 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 blah. After taking a course in economic game theory, a study of strategy which assumes individual self-interest in its models, US college students behaved more selfishly and expected others to do as well. The pernicious effects of the self-interest theory have been most disturbing, concludes Frank. By encouraging us to expect the worst in others, it brings out the worst in us. Dreading the role of the chump, we are often loath to heed our nobler instincts. This reminds me of a line from The Wire, and I think it was Bodie talking to Detective Jimmy McNulty, and he said, out there on the street, it's play or get played. And this is one of the problems with the system that we have. When you're on the street in situations of dire poverty, often it is play or get played, and nobody wants to be played. But here's the thing. If we have a different system where people are mostly using reciprocal strategies, then it doesn't have to be dog eat dog. It doesn't have to be play or get played. It can be win-win. I've quoted quite a lot in this video, so now I'd like to reflect on some of the things that I've said. And I want to tell you about the fable of the frog and the scorpion. So there's a frog and a scorpion by the side of a river, and the scorpion says to the frog, I want to get across the river. Can you carry me on your back? And the frog says to the scorpion, no, you're a scorpion, you're going to sting me. And the scorpion says, but that's completely illogical, because if I sting you, I will drown in the river. And the frog thinks to himself, perfectly logical, oh yes, if he stings me, he'll die, therefore he won't sting me. So the scorpion gets on the frog's back and the frog starts swimming across the river. Halfway across the river, he feels a sting in his back and the poison going through his blood. And he says to the scorpion, why did you do that? You're going to die now. And the scorpion says, I know, I couldn't help myself. It was in my nature. Here's the thing. If we assume that it's in the nature of all people to play everyone else, con their way to the top, act like an utter bastard, then that's what we're going to get. And mainstream economics does assume that, and look at the system we've got. As I said yesterday in my video, I am not an anti-capitalist because I believe there are many parts of capitalism which are extremely successful and we need to cherry pick those parts. But there are lots and lots and lots of incredibly dysfunctional aspects of capitalism and we need to bin them. The reason I describe myself as a post-capitalist is I take those functional parts from capitalism, functional parts of socialism, functional parts of anarchism and libertarianism, and an awful lot of psychology, because if you don't understand how humans think and can be influenced, then you're not going to change the system. And also you need a meditation routine because consciousness is important. So finally, economists and economics. Economists often refer to the study as economics as the dismal science. Bullshitters. So they say this as if kind of they're not taking themselves too seriously. They're self-depreciating. Oh, it's the dismal science. Liars. It's not a science at all because the assumptions which they start with are wrong. And it's the dismal science. This is a huge deception to put forward the idea, first of all, that they don't take themselves too seriously. They do. That so many economists are massive egotists. And secondly, that it's a science. It's not. And this level of groupthink from these economists speaks to a dysfunctional psychology. And if you're an economist watching this and you think that economics can fairly be described as the dismal science, go and look at your assumptions. I mean, really, really, really look at them. Thank you for giving me your time today. Peace.